Hello, and welcome to Parsley and Sage, the gardening podcast to grow by. I'm Pam Pooley.
And I'm Jean Farewell.
And we're here to share what we've learned from digging and designing,
Weeding and planting,
watering,
feeding,
figuring,
finessing,
loving the land,
and all things green.
So let's grow. We are back with grasses because they are so useful in the garden, especially the late season garden. Today we're going to talk about native grasses, and we're going to talk about native sedges as well that look like grasses, although they are different. Like the last episode, I'd like to start with some definitions. Grasses and sedges are both classified as monocots. They resemble each other superficially, but they're from different families. What else can you say about grasses, Jean?
Well, they can be annuals or perennials. And as we mentioned in the last episode, they're either cool or warm season plants. So your cool season grasses start growing early in the spring. Then they develop slowly during the period of cool weather and rain. And their foliage looks best in the late spring and the summer. But after that, they go dormant. Your warm season grasses grow rapidly after the daily temperatures reach, what would you say, about 60, 65 degrees, Pam?
Yes, I think that's right.
Yeah, okay.
And both of them, both types need to be cut back to short clumps of 2 to 5 inches in early spring before any new shoots emerge. Grasses, especially native ones, are really abundant in dry, open environments such as meadows and prairies. That's where they grow naturally. They provide habitat for feeding, nesting, and sheltering wildlife. And Native Americans use these grasses for all sorts of projects, including making baskets and making moccasins.
Oh, I like that. I could use some moccasins. Then you have your sedges.
Yes.
They're primarily perennials. They're mostly evergreen, cool season, shade-loving plants. And they generally prefer moist to wet environments. They're more diminutive than many grasses, and they also provide support to a variety of animals. But let's start with your favorite grasses, Pam.
Oh, you bet. Well, my very favorites come from the Panicum genus. That's switchgrass. These are North American prairie grasses, and they're real tough. The flowering part or inflorescence is very delicate, finely branched and loose, not as fluffy and fancy as some of the ornamental grasses. But these tolerate really poor soil and drought, so they're really quite low maintenance. And best of all, they do provide food and cover for birds and other wildlife. There's so many varieties and even new ones every year. I can't get over it. There's a favorite of mine, and I use it a lot. It's a 3 to 4 foot tall one called Shenandoah, with very delicate thread-like panicles that turn red late in the summer. And I've really found that it's wonderful in landscape design, having that reddish color. Brings you right through to the winter. I had success in wetter soil even with a variety called Northwind, and that's a 5-footer. It has a bluish hue, and it's just stays upright. It's such a strong candidate for wetter soils. And recently I read about a new variety named Cape Breeze, which was discovered in Martha's Vineyard. It's only 2 feet tall, also upright, and it's salt tolerant, of course. It blooms earlier in the season and stays green later into the fall. So in many senses, you can use switchgrass in a large variety of places.
And you mentioned color. You mentioned red. You mentioned blue. Mm-hmm. And color is a consideration with grass. They come in various colors. I mean, I have what I call my yellow bank, which has warm tones of red, orange, and yellow in different flowers and shrubs. And I needed a red accent. So at the time, all I could find in terms of grass was Japanese imparator grass, obviously not a native. Mm-hmm. It's known as blood grass. And it has these red tips. And it's a lovely grass, but then I found the native warrior grass, which is Panicum virgatum, and it has reddish tones. And in my blue garden, I use little blue stem, and I know you use that as well.
Yes. I was going to say that is another favorite of mine. The blue stem, especially little blue stem, and another new, relatively new addition called Standing Ovation. What an amazing plant. These are upright. Both of them are upright varieties that are about 3 feet tall. And these grasses are often called bunch grass They establish quickly on disturbed soils. They're perfect for banks. A lot of people say, "What can I grow on a slopey bank?" This is a great grass for that because it especially standing ovation. It maintains its upright nature. Little blue stem it's really a great source of food for a number of species of caterpillars, butterflies, birds, and small mammals. The flowering part looks much like the stem. It's really the color that you're going for with these blue stems. That's the special thing, as you mentioned, for design. The foliage adds blue, green, and purple to the garden. And in the late summer, early fall, it turns copper. So it's amazing in the landscape.
Little blue stem, I love. It doesn't have a bad day.
That's well put. That's very cool. Yes, it truly great addition to the border. Even though it's found in meadows and the like, these little blue stem and standing ovation are really strong in the border. Another one is Indian grass. That's a native that can be found throughout North America. It also likes dry and infertile soils. It's tolerant of almost any kind of well-drained soil in full sun. It grows 3 to 5 feet tall in clumps, too, with upright stems. And its late summer flowers have feathery panicles, and it's a little more dramatic, honestly, than the other two natives I mentioned. The panicles are really showy, and they usually last through the winter and provide forage again for songbirds.
And gosh, some of these grasses are bigger than shrubs. But what about shorter natives, Pam?
Well, a wonderful compact native in the colder Northeast is called northern prairie dropseed, Spirabilis. It's about 1 to 3 feet, and it's very unique. It forms soft, fine mounds in late summer, so it almost can be like a ground cover type grass. It gets small pink and brown tinted flowers that have 3 to 8 inch long flower heads with a sort of pyramidal shape. The florets are followed by a smooth, hard, round seed head, which drop to the ground when mature, and that's where the name came from, drop seed. And of course, the birds, especially sparrows and juncos, love those seeds.
Now, what about finding some of these grasses? Where do you find your natives? Online or find out about them?
Well, both. A lot of nurseries are starting to really catch on to the public's desire for natives and are carrying a lot of these, certainly. But you can look online when you put in native grasses in your state. You can usually find a place that sells them, but it's always safe to go to your local, or your state, I should say, Department of Conservation website, at least to find out the right native grasses for your region.
Right. That's important.
Yes.
Now let's talk about sedges.
Well, there's a mnemonic that goes, sedges have edges. The stems are triangular. I mean, you have to look pretty close to see that. But generally, sedges are shorter than grasses. There's usually a section of sedges in your local nursery. While grasses are showier, sedges are fantastic, especially as ground cover. And they're a very good contender for shady areas. They spill gently over the ground. Some you'll see if you go on woodland walks in your neighborhood or in your local woods. They're Carex, Pennsylvania, and Appalachia. That's Pennsylvania or Appalachian sedges. And they're like the soft grasses that grow naturally. This is just a natural looking plant, and I have used it in the garden. I bought landscape plugs of those Pennsylvania carexes and used them in a mass planting under big shade trees. And I'd say about 2 to 3 years later, it looked like a full sort of soft lawn. Very effective. So something to think about.
Yes, I planted just some small number of plugs, actually, of Carex, Pennsylvania, and they spread rapidly and created a great ground cover in a shady area. They require virtually no maintenance, and one year I didn't bother to weed whack them or cut them down to the ground in early spring, but they still came back beautifully, creating a green blanket during the growing season.
Nice.
They're great, and they're, only maybe 6 inches tall?
That's right.
It's a wonderful grass.
Yes.
I also use Carex flaccosperma, which is blue. And sedges also, they come variegated. They come in sort of yellow hues, so color scheme can be satisfied by sedges in many ways. So how have you used the native grasses and sedges in your garden, Pam?
Well, as noted in the last episode, the native grasses added a strong vertical structure element to the garden. I would start a perennial border design by integrating grasses along the back of the border or use as a matrix throughout a bed and filling in with perennials. So to listeners, take a piece of graph paper, see how big your grasses ultimately are going to get, give them plenty of space, because in between them is where you can put your color. As you said and I've said, you can also look for landscape plugs. Those are usually not sold at the nursery, but you can find them online. They're less expensive than, say, a 1 or 2 gallon perennial that you buy in the nursery. And it's a cost-effective way to establish, say, like a understory of sedge, using that as like a ground cover. You need to buy a lot of them, of course, and they take a few years to establish themselves, but it can be worthwhile if you're planting a lot of them. So this is something to think about. How about you, Jean? How do you use your grasses in your gardens?
I tend to think of them as ground covers. But
Interesting.
if I may utter the word turf grass, Pam, which is, criminal today to have a lawn or whatever. But 2 things. I have, for example, a small area of lawn for the dogs with zoysia grass. Mm-hmm. Never have I ever seen a weed or any kind of dandelion, nothing.
Is that a native?
No, it's not. Okay, it's not a native. So
okay.
I know this is a little off topic here, but I feel it has to be said because
yes,
if you have to have lawn area, this is a wonderful thing. You'll never have to ever use a chemical on it because it has a fibrous root system and keeps out every weed known to mankind.
Wow.
Then another factor is if you just do have grass, a lawn, let it grow. And you might get these billowing mounds as it rains and they flop down. You get these beautiful billowing mounds and it gives kind of shape and contour to your landscape. So it's not a crime to have turf grass.
That's a good point. Just like letting it grow.
Let it grow.
For example. And honestly, what's really cool is some people are finding, because more people are doing this than ever before. You're seeing people let their grass grow. They're saving money on gasoline for the gas powered mowers, mm-hmm. and we're cutting down on pollution. And I think that mindset is definitely growing, which is great, along with that grass.
And in places like Scandinavia, that's been the norm to have unmown grass areas.
Yeah, and people have to start to accept it. That's the thing. In our psyches, we're used to this pristine lawn.
Yeah.
But more and more people are turning to growing parts of their lawn. At least a good way to think about that is to grow sections that are maybe not used for entertaining. They're in the sort of the back, or they're along the edges, the borders. You can mow paths through them so they look intentional, mm-hmm. and you keep those edges nice and clean, meaning like nice and even, not weedy. So mm-hmm. it looks like, they're growing that up on purpose. And you can even like put a bench at the end of the path, so it makes like a destination to go to, which is cool. But what I was going to say regarding our focus on natives is that often when you let your grass grow, there are natives in there. The grasses. I'm finding that it's amazing that some people around here in the Hudson Valley area, they're growing their grasses, and their blue stem is in there, and native panicum or switchgrass, mm-hmm. just natives that were here once long ago.
Right.
So you'd be really surprised to see what you find. Yeah. So anyway, well, thanks, Jean. I think that we covered a lot. I hope listeners will take note of some of these great grasses and how they nourish your ecosystem.
Thank you, Pam.
That wraps up today's garden conversation. We would like to answer your gardening questions on the show. So please message us on Instagram at Parsley and Sage Podcast, or visit our website at parsleyandsagepodcast.com. Thank you for joining us. I'm Pam Pooley.
And I'm Jean Farewell for Parsley and Sage. Happy digging!